Hi, welcome to the Fools and Sages podcast. We're very happy to welcome back Krishnan Venkatesh, who is with us, about 6 or 7 months ago. And we got into some interesting topics then. And Krishnan, welcome back.
Yeah, thank you. Very happy to be back. And um, I don't remember where exactly we left off in the discussion. I think the last thing was that Brian held up a skull to the camera, and so I came equipped with mine, and so the and I guess the invitation was to talk about death and dying,
We
mortality.
did leave it there. If you want to start there, we can. Or I'll just ask you, what have you been thinking about? And we'll see
Okay.
where that goes.
Okay, so at St. John's we think on 3 or 4 different fronts at the same time, depending on what classes we have, and um, I'll just fill you in firstly. So where my thought is going, and I'm not quite sure how everything converges, but there are connections there. So the Thoreau essay is part of a book called Thoreau as Philosopher, and I've just given the final proofreads of that essay. It turned out to be a 30-page essay in this book, Thoreau as an Asian Thinker, and the book is Thoreau as Philosopher, or Thoreau and Philosophy. It's what it's called, implying the and, I suppose, implying kind of questionable relationship between the two. So my essay was done, and it's on its way for publication. The book should come out in this summer sometime. It looks like a very interesting book. I haven't read the work by the other contributors, but I'm honored to be in that company. You know, so over the last, since we talked, my thinking about Thoreau in the East has taken different courses. I mean, most noticeably with Thoreau's affinity with, not influenced by. So affinity with works that he could not possibly have read. So, for example, the Taoist philosopher Zhuangzi had many moments that coincide with Thoreau. Most striking of all, the tradition of the Chinese yinjia, or recluse, kind of like scholar recluse, who leave urban life and disappear into the mountains. That's a tradition that is central to the heart of Chinese poetry, but also translated into Japanese literature, right into the mainstream of Japanese literature. You guys have read Kamo no Chomei's Record of a 10-foot square hut, right? Which picks up on a genre that Bai Juyi, the Chinese poet, established. About a guy who takes off into the wild and builds a cabin, lives in the cabin for the rest of his life, basically. And then in Japan too, you have the Japanese poetic diary, which started in the 10th century, that is full of minute observations of nature and the dew, and passages from Thoreau's journals seem like exactly congruent with that tradition. There are parts of Sei Shonagon that if I pulled out of context, you'd think were written by Thoreau. And then thirdly, the other place that I went and discovered, and I'd like to do further work on this, is Thoreau and Basho, because the narrow road to the deep north, which is the greatest work of Japanese literature, 7th century work about the aging Basho's walk into the north by himself. And so Thoreau is a walker, but also an observer of nature. And the idea of walking as the study of death, right? The preparation for death, because both for Thoreau and Basho, real walking, what Thoreau calls sauntering, which to take off into the unknown, into the pathless, and you're not sure whether you're going to return or not, right? And so this is like the essence of it for both of them. And so there are many affinities. I also found out recently that there are 130 translations of Walden into Chinese,
Wow.
published translations, right? And a comparably astonishing amount for Japan too. So Thoreau really struck a heart in those traditions, as if he fits right in. The poet Lin Yutang said of Thoreau that there are passages in his work that he pulled out and translated into Chinese you'd think was written by a Chinese poet. So anyway, so my thoughts on Thoreau have kind of like landed on those questions that are avenues to be pursued, further. Not that I think that comparison is the most interesting way to go about traditions or authors. I mean, I don't think it is, but I think that certainly the dialogue between the two, kind of imagined dialogue between the two, can shed light on things. So that was Thoreau going on, and in the meantime, I've done observational biology with St. John's freshmen, and we're now at doing dissection. We did Goethe and flower dissection, Harvey, and now in heart dissection we did Aristotle and animal dissections, right? So we've been thinking about the relationship of what we call form and function, or I might say structure and life, right? And what makes a vital being, what makes an organism, these labs have tended to be fairly emotional for some, because we're so close to working on the border of life and death, right? That it really gets us all thinking about serious things. I mean, in a way, we should all do dissection because it gets us thinking like that. So there's that, and then of course I've been teaching in the new Middle Eastern Classics Masters at St. John's, which is in the first year, and it's very vibrant. And we have been reading, for example, a series of texts, both from Hebrew and from Arabic, that are in rich conversation about questions like the source of the universe. Why is it so messy down here? And they're all heavily influenced by Plato and Aristotle. So it's a kind of three-way conversation between Greeks, Hebrews, and Muslims about these things. And one example of the kind of book that we've been reading, where these strains have all converged, is a book by Ibn Gabirol, who is called The Font of Life, which Michael Wolff might have mentioned in your talk. But it's written about the 10th century, and it's a book. It's a long, dense argument about the relation between the first mover, or the one that is at the origin of things, and this messy, multifarious world. How do we get from one to the other? And this book was written by a Jewish Neoplatonist in Arabic, writing in Spain. Right, so my head swims when I think about that confluence of traditions. So then almost everything we've read since has been everything since I guess the 10th century has been like heavily influenced by this three-way conversation between things, and all the writers, the philosophers of Islam, were also physicians, right? And they're all physicians, and they had minute experience with dissection. And I just found out that Harvey's circulation of the blood was anticipated 400 years before by an Islamic writer who discovered the circulation of the blood, independently. Harvey could not have known about this, but discovered the circulation of the blood as he was writing a commentary on Avicenna's anatomy, right? So that these connections are all around. There's a dialogue there that's waiting to be unearthed that I find very interesting. Anyway,
Yeah,
so
very much.
yeah.
That's a really fun collection of mutually informing topics. Maybe you mentioned sauntering, and that was what Thoreau called walking and preparation for death. I was familiar with it from John Muir, who said when we're in the wilderness, we should saunter, not hike. And I don't know if he was intentionally referencing Thoreau, or came upon that independently, but maybe let's start out by talking about walking and what you mean by that being preparation for death. And yeah, maybe let's just start there, and then we can pull in some of these other threads.
Well, with Basho's work, it's clear that whenever he starts walking. So all of his major works, they're all short, but all of his major works are extremely condensed accounts of walks into the north. And he's very aware of having a frail body, so he's aware of having a frail body that's just bones and what he thinks like some kind of webbing, some kind of like frayed cloth that's over the bones that the wind blows through, so he feels that. But for him, this vulnerability is the exposure is the essence of the creative spirit, right? Where you're the closer you are to that point, the more open you are to um to life and death, right? What's out there? It's like that. I mean, I paraphrase it. It's like that moment when you've been very sick, and you turn the corner and you're just recovering, and you're lying in bed and you're weak and you're sapped. But strangely enough, then your body is also at its most powerful, deeply, because you've just overcome this germ, and so now you're up on a rise, but there's this newness to everything, right? And you said, whoa, I'm alive, new. And so that kind of openness, I think you see in Basho the whole time, and I think you see in Thoreau the whole time. So with Thoreau, with his major walks, I'm thinking the collection of walks in the Maine woods, which is like 3 big walks in the Maine woods. He um it's very powerful because I don't think he necessarily expects to be coming back. So this is not like the walks around Walden where he's close to Walden. He actually goes off into the wilderness and places where there are no trails, right? And so there's risk involved, heavy risk, and so he, I think that underneath all this, that he's thinking about life, what life is and the boundaries of life, because his consciousness picks up on all the different forms of life around him and tries to get, so he's very aware. He's not isolated. He's not an atomic being, but I think that very openness to what there is around him as he makes his way into this kind of virgin forest sometimes, that there's a vulnerability there. There's a rawness and a great sense that of the inhospitability of nature, that it's not made for us.
Mhm. Yeah, the first part that you said, what that immediately reminded me of, uh, is Hanshan, the Cold
Uh-huh.
Mountain.
Yes.
A-
Mhm.
And Cold Mountain, he's a Chinese sage who took the name Cold Mountain from the place where he lived, which was a place called Cold Mountain. And he says some things that are very interesting. Like he says, try to make it to Cold Mountain, but you
Mhm.
have to be, you have to be aware that there's places where the snow never melts, even in the summertime, and the terrain is very rocky, and you may not make it because your heart is not like mine.
Mhm.
And what I read in all these guys, and again, this is built on my experience, is that and this is kind of one of my one string banjo songs, is that you have to spend time in nature. You have to spend time in nature, not because necessarily it will make you think different thoughts intellectually, but because the context of nature literally shifts your entire being into a different mode. And that walking, part of that walking is part of transitioning from that normal mode, which is where our walk started, through this immersion into a completely non-man-made world. And I would argue, because I've been immersed in Heidegger, that we're moving from the small b being world closer to the large b being
Mhm.
world. And that is actually something that, by contextualizing things, prepares us for death, by focusing on what is being, not in the social world of humans, but in the very, fundamental aspect, and that somehow nature plays our nervous system in a different way than the world that we have created does. So it's that dispositional shift that I'm very interested in, and how we go about that, and does that actually mimic the dispositional shift that the change of consciousness moving into death represents.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, that's very good. Now with Hanshan, he was. I don't know his biography actually. I'm taking that he was at one time a scholar, right?
well, maybe a Buddhist monk. I know he used to show up at the back door of the kitchen at the Buddhist monk and hang
Yeah,
out with a buddy of his. And he was
right.
a poet, so he would write his poems on the cliff sides.
Yeah.
And the emperor said, "Okay, this is a man of Tao. Let's get him and stick him in the palace here, so I can have me a man of Tao." And he sent the army out 80 li west of the capital or wherever into the boonies, and said, "Grab him, and bring him
Mhm.
to me." And they said they saw him on a couple of occasions, but they never could get close to him. They never could catch him. He's like a Bigfoot, right?
Yes, right.
And so they said, "Well, okay, then just collect up his poems." And so we
Uh-huh.
have now, I think, about 300 of his poems, and I think you can probably go visit Cold Mountain now. I've seen
Yeah.
pictures of it. But other than that, maybe associated with the Tiantai
Hmm.
uh, lineage, but
Yeah.
but it is that, watching the passing of generations. He talks
Hmm.
about that. He walks about people, or talks rather about people visiting the Yellow Springs. Is that how they refer to it when people
Yeah.
pass? And he
Right.
sort of
Hmm.
sees that, but here he is, this old bug on the mountain, and very poignant, just really poignant. But it also like takes us away from these momentary concerns and the whirring of the cicadas, as the
Hmm.
10 bowls would refer to it, and sort of shifts our mode to a different,
Yeah.
and I would argue to a different nervous system, to a whole
Hmm.
different balance of brain spheres or something.
Yeah.
And
I would.
then we come back and say, wow, what was that?
Yeah, I would agree with that. You've. I mean, you guys know about the practice of night walking, right? In different traditions, that cultivates. So night walking cultivates the peripheral vision system, and and so that essential part of spiritual growth for some traditions is night walking, because it's that peripheral system that actually plugs you in to the circumambient oneness or variety of things. You're there with
In-
everything. Yeah.
Interesting.
It's
Yeah.
When I
interesting.
fight, I often see my opponent in peripheral vision rather
Yeah.
than focused on him. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. When you focus, it's because your peripheral vision system has already picked out what to focus on.
And if you're fighting two people,
Yeah.
that's the key. Yeah.
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 Um, there was a phrase in there. I think Brian said it, and I think Krishnan, you reacted to it, about preparing us for death, and this the maybe it was Thoreau thinking about his walks in the Maine wilderness, preparing him for death. But I thought, man, there's a lot of assumptions in that phrase, and we should unpack those. So
Yeah.
there are some assumptions about why does death demand preparation of us, and then there's a bunch of assumptions about what that preparation entails.
Hmm.
What comes up for you around those, Krishna?
That's a very deep question. I mean, in a way, one would say that um, you could say that all of life is preparation for death, right? Or avoidance of death, right? You could kind of negative preparation for death. So the idea that everything we do is distraction or stimulation from a knowledge that we're going to die. So children may not have that so vividly, so they retain this ability to lose all track of time. But as you get older, you're more aware that everything you do is to prepare for death. You become more acutely aware of hunger, for example. And then I'm hungry, and then there's always that panic around the corner if you sense that there's no solution for your being hungry right now, right? So various experiences like panic at hunger, falling, accidents, people dying around you. I think you can't really escape from it. And in most other cultures, you get exposure to the very old and also the dying. Down in the streets, I'm thinking when I was in China, in India recently, I'd see, these very, very old people, kind of like very, like almost bone, and they're walking around buckled over with their stick like this. And you don't see that here. Like here, it's all buried away somewhere. And so there's a way in which when you're in the kind of culture where everything's out in the open, then uh, there's already a preparation for death going on because you don't see yourself as separate from that. And I might think that in our culture here, there's perhaps the entire culture is based on avoidance of the thought of death. So the culture of artificial youth, for example, that keeps going on. All the values of youth that continue, right? You're supposed to be aging youthfully. The embalming at death, where you have this person called the funeral director who makes you look good, right? And so, so the preoccupation with appearances, the appearances of life, looking good, and so on. That we want to say that our culture is one of the cultures that has been most dedicated as a culture to fleeing the idea of death. We kind of mention it, but then the flight from death also involves the wreaking of vast destruction beyond our ken.
Yeah,
Yeah,
no, I think
yeah.
that's worth going into in a deeper way, even to unfold that.
Mm,
Um, for example, Wilhelm Reich, when he's doing therapy, he says that a fundamental aspect of people's psychological constellation is what he called Lebensangst,
uh-huh.
right? Which is living angst
Right.
or
Mm-hmm.
living anxiety. And, Heidegger talks about angst, and he's really describing Reich's Lebensangst because he says, we fear the tiger that we see. But when we are just out and we don't have a particular thing to fear, that's what anxiety is about. It's not
Mm-hmm.
knowing what's there. And so he argues that it's not attached to any particular thing in life, any small being be, that it's actually a fundamental condition of capital B being,
Uh-huh.
that to be alive is to have this fear of living,
Right.
which is the flip side of the fear of death,
Right. Mm-hmm.
right? The fear of
Yeah.
need, the fear of physical harm, the fear of all of that. And Heidegger also says, as I think Zen monks do, as I think Hindu traditions do, uh, your being won't be authentic until you look at this and you realize the picture frame that this all happens in, and it's that contextualizing that actually generates meaning.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's why I think there is an ontological aspect to this that we miss, because there is that project. It's a cultural project to avoid death. We
Yes.
talked about that a couple episodes ago, and how some people that I knew that were Vietnam vets seemed to be better equipped than some people I knew that had studied philosophy in depth,
Yeah.
but they had seen death. And the point you were making about in India, that was the whole world until very recently, right? Until this
Uh-huh.
middle class project of, and that's what I would think when I would see certain prominent politicians that were obviously extremely aged standing up with big shiny plastic teeth.
Yeah.
A la the uh what was the movie with the girl with the bow and arrow, and they all had big shiny teeth with Stanley? Um,
Uh,
Again, where
to Kill a
appearance was
Mockingbird. Mockingbird something.
Oh yeah,
Right.
the Hunger
The
Games.
Hunger Games.
The Hunger
Right.
Games, right,
Yeah.
where
Mockingjay. Yeah.
appearance was dialed
Yeah.
up to a hideous parody of itself.
Yeah.
And here's a person that's clearly aged, looking like he's got, teeth of an 18-year-old saying, trust me."
Yeah.
And I'm not being partisan about this because I don't think it's a partisan issue. I think it's a cross-cultural issue that has to do with yeah, as you say, avoiding death, but also, the way we, because we've looked away from death as a culture, we kind of don't get it. We don't understand it as a fruiting out.
Mm-hmm.
We can't see any of the fulfilling aspects of death. I know that sounds bizarre to say, but in the way that every good narrative sort of explains itself in the last chapter and sews up all the
Yeah.
threads and brings the fruit to fruit, that that can't be had without the picture frame that death represents somehow.
Yeah.
If fall never came, the fruit would never be ripe,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's a gift, isn't it? That otherwise you'd be like the Greek gods. You wouldn't. What would a sunset be to you if you're like a Greek god? You've seen like infinite numbers of them. It's nothing. It's not important. What would a human life be to you? It's like the life of a fruit fly, like kind of nothing.
Yeah.
But when you have one, and when you know you have one and you're going to die, that you can live now. You can live facing it. Now it
And
means something.
I had a moment years ago when I had an uncle that was in the hospital dying of brain cancer, I think. And
Yeah.
I had been doing ceremonies with some, the South American folks. And I woke up in the middle of the night and I felt like I was connected to his head and that he was staring straight at death, no escape, no side path, no, and that he was terrified from it. And I
Uh-huh.
felt like I was in psychic connection, like can happen in a sort of a shamanistic setting. And the thing that rose up in my head was a line from a song. And the line was, all complete with the sight of seeds of life with you.
Mm.
That's today's rock and roll reference.
Okay.
And and uh it with which is that idea. I can't understand the fruit if I'm hiding inside. I'll miss the ripe fruit if I'm hiding inside because I'm afraid of winter,
Uh-huh.
because the first chill wind drives me in. Right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
I've got to be there to get the ripe fruit. We talked about lives having different trajectories
Yeah.
and the necessity of having a trajectory that doesn't like peak out, plateau, and then, you know, the end of your life is a loss with your battle with whatever disease or whatever, and so that ultimately, no matter how high, it always comes down,
Mm-hmm.
that's just a wrong picture, and that it's actually this upward trajectory that leads to ultimately wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
But that wisdom, has to do with that immersion with being. And so, they say that Zen never flourished as much as in the Kamakura period, when all these samurai knew that literally tomorrow they could go out and just get their heads chopped right off.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, what you're describing is not it's as much going downward as going upward, right? It's getting deeper.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
So
I think as a cultural project, when we find ourselves without meaning, it might be because we think we've finally succeeded in this project of conquering death.
yeah. Yeah. I my image for this that I think I usually tell my students at some point in relation to some text is the Western modern bathroom,
Mm.
right? The white tiles, everything white, and you never have to look at anything. Right? You do your stuff, you close the lid, and you flush it down, and it goes somewhere. And then you wash your hands, and then you leave. And so you never have to think if you contemplate yourself as as an animal with an outhole, or at least that the outhole is essential to you, and so you're a tube, and two ends of the tube, right? And so the outhole, things go out, and even rational, intelligent people who are very capable of thinking about consequences don't think about where the stuff goes or who deals with it, right? So,
You
yeah, go ahead.
you may have uncovered why art became ugly.
Hmm.
It could have been that we had plenty of ugly in life and we didn't need it in art. Art could still
Yeah,
work to
right.
be beautiful, to show us
Mhm.
what was beautiful. But when everything became Levittown, right, and we hid all the ugly things, then it's like, well, gee, life is so unbalanced. Let's just, and then ugly art showed up.
Yeah, yeah. Right. There's a wonderful fascicle of Dogen. I think it's like number 8. It's early on in the Shobogenzo that talks about cleaning. Right. And it's one of the Dogen fascicles that's not abstractly Zen, but very directly about doing something or how you do something. And in this case, it's cleaning things, how you go to the bathroom. So with minutiae about how you wipe, what you use to wipe, where you put it, how you clean up, and it's in a way it's appalling in its frankness. And then he says at the end, if you do this, the whole world will be a Buddha world. And so just reading, so that's one of the essays in which
Right.
he walks the talk. So the thing is that the human being takes care of his own shit, and this is the shit on many levels, right?
Yeah.
um
Yeah.
you don't leave it for someone else to take care of. And so this fascicle is actually very profound, I find, when you think about what it means to take care of your own shit. But this means that firstly acknowledging that you have shit to take care of.
Right. Well,
Yeah.
and there's a dispositional thing there too. I spent time in the Zen Center, and you would do periodically rituals that they would call a sesshin,
Right.
where you might do 12 days where you're up at 5, you are meditating. You might do a sitting meditation session, then you do walking meditation, then you do a meal, and then you'll do a teisho with the master, and then you go back to sitting and you go back, and everything is extremely regimented. You're going to eat, there's going to be 3 bowls, and their bowls will always be set this way, and you're going to eat, through this procedure. And when you clean up, this is how you clean up. And here, you're going to always put a little bit out for the hungry ghosts. And everything is so regimented. And the way it was explained to me was it was so that you didn't have to worry about any of that. None of the small being stuff was needed to take your attention away. It was all just regulated, and it was in the groove, and then your expansion could happen in other dimensions because you're not getting constantly sucked down into this mundane. It's just all what it is.
Mhm.
And the fact that going to the bathroom would be in there is just part of that dispositional place.
Yeah.
My Zen master used to say the world of God is wonderful, but in the world of God, there are no bathrooms and no restaurants.
Yes.
And but this is literally a way from how do we stay as close to that world of God by that dispositional keeping our head in cold mountain, even though we have to wash our bowls.
Yeah.
And boy, that is super profound, super
Right.
profound.
No, well,
I
because
think there's
washing the
another
bones
perspective
is
on
cold
that.
mountain, right?
Oh,
Yeah. Go
sorry,
ahead. Go
Krishna.
ahead. You go ahead.
Uh, the other perspective being kind of like the Thich Nhat Hanh, mindfulness is found in the mundane. It's not just that we're taking care of the mundane, and regimenting it so that the mind can be free from making decisions about the small stuff, but rather that meaning itself and like the height of self-awareness is achieved in mundanity, not in drifting off into not being here and now. And so I think that tension is kind of in the examples that you're both giving also.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
Thich Nhat
And
Hanh would say that that washing the bowl is cold mountain, right? In that once you realize how mysterious and unfathomable an act like that is, I think that's the origin of the ritual respect for washing bowls and things. It's not just ritual. It's when you understand the deep mystery that goes on in this water and what the bowl is and what your hands are doing. This is but then that I think is having opened up to Cold Mountain. So Cold Mountain is really where you are. But
If you bring
yeah,
if you bring it there, right.
yeah,
But if you're washing the bowl saying, why do I have to wash this damn bowl? Somebody else should wash this bowl. Or so, in other words, it isn't just that we drift off. And this is one of the interesting things because this dovetails a lot of my thoughts about postmodernism, which is a distal
mm,
connection. But is that we don't just drift off, we actually actively run off in an effort to ward off certain realizations or certain dispositions that for energetic reasons we don't find easily attained. And that's where these rigid structures, we might have an intellectual reaction. I know I was young when I was in the Zen center, and I of course did. But what I came to understand over the years was that sort of was a container that helped regulate your energetics, which helped your dispositional shifting
right.
facility somehow. I know that's it may be a bank shot way to say that, but there is a purpose served to that I've come to respect in things that show up as rigid from the outside.
Yeah,
I guess that's the point.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So can I bring it back to the question of walking? And I want to ask you guys about what you think about this. So in writing this Thoreau piece, I became very aware of walking as philosophical practice. So quite tangibly, my best thoughts come when I'm walking, right? And every time, but I have to give it enough time. I've got to walk. It's got to be bumpy ground, right? Out in nature. Walking around a city block doesn't cut it. So this act of walking as a primal philosophical act, it makes me wonder if the idea of a peripatetic, a walker is not incidental to the nature of these philosophers, but actually essential. These philosophers are walkers. Yeah, so I'm trying to figure out how to think through this, and you guys can help me. So what is it that is in walking that is actually like a somatic practice of philosophy? I'm not, and I think I wouldn't say that everybody who walks has ideas. That's not true. But for people who have you know creative ideas through walking, I think the two are intimately connected.
You,
Why?
you know, a couple things off the top of my head. I mean, I'm somebody that has walked around in circles professionally,
Right.
literally. But and so there is an energetic to that. But where I was going to go from that was, I've been reading William James, his Principles of Psychology, 100 years plus old. But one
Right.
of the things that he pointed out that I thought was very interesting is like, how did I never notice this? Reading as much as I have, and that is that if you look at the way we write, and I think this goes for almost all languages, we don't just write one long run on sentence. We have this thing of a period and a break and a stop. And he argues that within the stream of consciousness, there are these two modes that are almost like a yin and a yang, that one might be a gathering and then the other one is a putting out. Right. Well, even in the act of walking, particularly in Bagua, there is a movement where everything comes into the center and then everything moves out from the center. And that's what we are actually using to drive chi.
Mm-hmm.
And it's different. In Zen, you do kinhin, walking meditation, but they don't specify any of the energetics inside. But I think that there is a rhythm to thought, just like there is a rhythm to walking. And that maybe there is a natural energetic. But the other thing is walking in nature involves both of those brains. Borrowing from Ian McGilchrist, there's looking for berries, looking for the particular thing, but there's also looking for tigers that might be anywhere.
Hmm.
And that anywhere brain is a balancing to that specific focus brain.
Yeah.
And again, borrowing from McGilchrist and pretty up to date science, I think, so
Hmm.
that one sees wholes, one sees parts, and so it could be that in that walking, both the energetic and the environmental context balances our circuits in a more natural way because we probably did this for 300,000
Yeah.
years, right, or something like that. Um, so our energetic may literally be tuned to that somehow. But those are my off the top of my head. Boaz, what did you think?
Yeah, you went where um you put a really nice structure to a couple of directions that I think are good. Um, I can add anecdotally that when I was in New Mexico, I hiked a lot, and and I have the experience of getting lost up in the mountains, and of running out of water in the mountains, and of ending up in much rougher terrain than I expected to. I remember one time in particular, it was May, but we had had a lot of snow that year, and a friend of mine and I decided to go over Deception Peak and Penitente and back on the Windsor Trail. And we got over Deception and Lake Peak, which was sketchy. But then when we got to Penitente, we didn't have snowshoes, and the snow was 3 or 4 feet deep,
Huh.
and so we had to go off the side of Penitente down into the wash and post holing the whole way. And there were there were plenty of times on that walk that I thought we're in serious trouble. We had to go through those scree fields, and it was steep and gnarly, and we were not equipped for it. And there's like a determination that I associate also with getting into deep water in a ceremony, where you can't think too much about how deep of a situation you've gotten yourself into. You have to just put one foot in front of the other and keep going, keep going. You will get to the Windsor Trail eventually, but not if you worry too much. And there's another association from what you were talking about, Brian, that's connected, that in ceremonies, singing and breathing also have this interdependent relationship, or chanting and breathing, that has this expansion, contraction, or what is it, systolic or
Just that
bisystolic, diastolic,
diastolic.
thank you,
Yeah.
and probably peristaltic in that context also, relationship, where there's a physicality to um, to let's say mental energy, emotional energy, that it's not just intellectual, ethereal, but there's a physicality to it that you can connect to when you're in a ceremony or in a serious. I know runners get this too. Runners are always telling you that I get my best thinking done, and we always just chalk that up to endorphins. But it's not.
Mm.
I don't think it's just endorphins. I think there's a that in the Western world, I think we associate mind with the brain and not with the body. But I think um, uh, Chinese medicine certainly tells us that the health of the organs and how they're operating in relationship to one another is absolutely going to um, contextualize or even dictate the quality of mind. And now we see that with, like, what Western medicine finding that the quality of your gut biome is essential to your mood, and
Yeah.
so metabolism and all of those things are part of mind. And I used to talk about all the hardest business problems on hikes with colleagues. We would go out for hours, and what we would find is that the way we talked about business problems went deeper and deeper
Yeah.
within a hike. So we'd start out talking about, there's kind of like this tactical issue, but we'd get to strategy, we'd get to culture, we'd get to the quality of mind of the organization and understand our problems at a level that we certainly didn't going into the hike. So I think I'm saying a lot of what Brian did too, just my own anecdotal version of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I
That
think
makes
in the West, go ahead, Krishna.
no. I'm just
I
thinking
was
one
just
of the
going to
things that
say, in the West, we're missing one of the treasures that solves the mind body problem, which
yeah
is chi, prana, organ.
yeah
But go ahead.
yeah yeah. For Aristotle, it would be suke, right? That certain connection with the Greeks.
Yeah,
But
or
yeah
pneuma, maybe.
pneuma. But I like this idea of rhythm in a way. And as you both were talking, I couldn't help thinking of mountain. Yeah, the mountain stream. The way a mountain stream goes down, and it eddies and it whirls and then it flows and eddies, narrows like that. So there's rhythm and duration certainly help. I mean, I've had also deep conversations that have arisen only in the course of a walk, but it's partly because in the walk you give it enough time, right, to happen, and things happen when they happen. You can't force them. When they're ripe, then they happen. So part of the things is giving enough time, which means accepting that there is a rhythm that you're not in control of, right? As opposed to a meeting room where you set the agenda and you dictate the rhythm, and you never get good thinking done. I mean, basically, the best you can do is just sketch your possibilities, but it's got to be. But for thinking, then you need time, and I think this is also why many of the best conversations happen after dinner, after you've had good food and drink, and then you relax, and then things start coming out. Right. And
Yeah.
so,
Well,
yeah,
well,
go
the
ahead.
basic formula, right, is that Jing transmutes to Qi,
Mm-hmm.
Qi transmutes to Shen. So Jing is the physical component. And yeah, when you move the physical component, you will start to circulate chi through your body in a different way. And that is
Yeah.
actually going to support the consciousness, which rides on the quality of chi. And
Yeah.
the after dinner thing, well, in Chinese they call it gu qi, right?
Gucci.
Which is the qi that comes from food. So our blood's richer, our brain is maybe, better fed, but there is that idea that we're giving a better support to our consciousness
Mm-hmm.
when it's, like the formula with Zoe. I asked Zoe once, one of my teachers, why is the world in disorder? He said, well, the world is in disorder because not enough people operate with virtue. And I said, okay, well, why don't people operate with virtue? Well, the reason people don't operate with virtue is because they don't have clarity. I said, oh, well, why do you think people operate without clarity? Because, being a student, you got to push it, right?
Right.
And he said, because they don't get enough oxygen to their brains. And that's a pretty nice dovetail right
Yeah.
there, right? You want some clarity, you get some oxygen to your brain. But I like qi because, of course, because it goes all the way back to the Huangdi Neijing, and the Yellow Emperor solved the mind body problem for us all. We just have to come back to it to really get it.
Yeah.
Um, but also, I thought this was further illuminated in ceremonies where some of the energetics become more apparent in ways that they're not always in normal uh, consciousness. Um, but that's what I think the connection is. That part of it is context, and part of it's outside, but part of it is inside.
Mm-hmm.
And Yeah, we might have had to do some of our best and quickest thinking on the run, given that
Yeah.
'cause remember, we're the ancestors of the survivors of this whole story,
Hmm.
right? So walking, I think, has been that persistence hunting thing. Um,
I
I
was
would
thinking about
also
that.
maybe argue that the function of blood through the heart opens up a different electromagnetic circuit that we take information from. There's a lot going on here. That I'm sure of.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Montaigne, in the late essays, so Montaigne's essays in the beginning, so the first series have a lot of thought about Socrates' idea that philosophy is the practice of death, right? And then um, in his later essays, one of the things he says that's striking is that he looks at the peasants around him. So he has a lot to do with the peasants, and said they die well. They haven't been philosophizing, but they die well. And and then this thing hits him, is that if you live well, you're going to die well. So this is like the living with what you need, doing the right things, right?
And
Virtue.
having no attachment. The Dzogchen
Yeah.
Buddhists say that the highest level Lama dies like a dog in the street.
Mm.
And when I heard that, I was like, whoa,
Well,
that's metal, baby.
Krishnan, I would
But you
just
can see no attachment, right? And I
uh,
feel like I was thinking this the other day. I don't know, I'm probably on dogs number 23 through 26 now, something like that. And I was thinking about, not morbidly, but kind of actually nostalgically, about the dogs that have died in my arms, who I saw from puppyhood. And that they really were teaching me something in
mhm,
that, even though I felt like I was being there for them, they were being Dzogchen masters for me. Over and over. Like, did you get it? Did you get it? Did you get it? Schopenhauer loved his
mhm,
poodles because he thought that they shared the same sort of metaphysical circumstance that humans do. And so I think there's something there. I really do. And maybe it's from our first goldfish that goes down the toilet.
yeah,
Uh, and maybe this is also part of the kung fu thing, is that there's a lot we can learn from animals. We've been doing this as a lineage thing from in front, right? But I think this is an important one. And I guess, when I learned how to slaughter, I learned from an Islamic guy how to slaughter. And this whole idea, there's a poem or a prayer that goes with it that's very similar in ritual to the kosher slaughtering. And the idea is to the Amusei, to the muses, back to the creative spirit of the universe. And with the idea, it isn't there's love for when the herdsman slaughters an animal from his herd, it isn't with any negative feeling at all. It's with love, with the intention that as that spirit is released, that chi that's released, and if you do qigong, you can feel when an animal's slaughtered, there is a release of chi, which I'm not going to get into black magic, but that's why they do that. So that release of chi, the idea is that you're coupling your consciousness with that chi to send it up so that it's going to come back as the most beautiful bird or the most beautiful animal in your herd. So it comes back. So we're together in this turning of
mhm,
the cycle, because I feed my children with this. I take life from your life. You take life from my life. We do this, and it's not negative. Like, someone pointed out to me, when a wolf gets a rabbit, there's no bad feelings. The wolf is thinking, oh, I love these. I love these. And he wants to become one with it. And that's the ultimate spirit of the cycle of life, which is, I know it's a bank shot, but
yeah,
I kind of want to recontextualize death.
mhm,
Because we're in this cultural spot, as you say, where it's like part of the not story. It's the bloody rhinoceros head
mhm,
sitting on the table of every incarnate human, knowing that it's there, but we can't talk about it because we will lose our shit. It was like, no, that's the first time we'll actually have a chance of getting our shit together.
Hmm.
Like literally getting it into one sock, right? So that the story is fulfilling at the end, so that the fruit falls off the tree and it's ripe, it's not rotted, right? I mean, that's all.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm circling the topic here, but
No.
Krishnan, if I might, I just wanted to come back to your thought about rhythm for a moment, because I was thinking there's there's more to be said about that, and and one element that I've experienced in ceremonies and walking is that, and I think actually playing music and listening to music also, is that the conscious mind, the analytical mind, gets hypnotized by rhythm, I think. And that allows it to get out of the way. And that's a super simplified and inadequate description of what trance induction entails. But I think when we hypnotize the conscious mind, the the mind that's trying to look out for the berries and the tigers and right, then um the greater mind, the intuitive mind, it becomes more liberated,
Hmm.
and
The mind
we
that's
have,
open.
yeah, we have
Yeah.
access to more. And I
Yeah.
think rhythm specifically does that. And I think rhythm and its association with the heartbeat, or with, Brian mentioned long distance running as a hunting method. I think rhythm and the heartbeat is essential to that. Um, and so there's
Hmm.
something really primal there happening too.
have you ever heard of super learning?
What's super learning?
Super learning is a method that was come up by a Bulgarian professor, and basically what he would do is teach people an entire language in a weekend.
Hmm.
But the way that he did it, with like 90% retention, but the way that he did it is he would always have them in this super relaxed state, and he would have music playing that I remember him saying it was Baroque music, but the point was 60 beats per minute,
Hmm.
which we say in music is what? Andante, right? Or walking.
Hmm.
And what they found with people, not only would they learn this language, and they're doing this for a weekend or 3 days, something like that, but they would also have spontaneous remission of certain physical conditions. So this idea that some extra wiring goes up under the influence of this rhythmic thing, I wonder if, rather than putting the one hemisphere to sleep, if it might not be waking up the other hemisphere more. Or, and I hear this fascinating thing that the corpus callosum does more about choking down communication between the spheres than facilitating it, that it's actually has more of a filtering effect. Well, I wonder if maybe there isn't some way that the rhythmic nervous effect, macrocosmic, microcosmic, I mean, we really unwind that in Bagua walking, but it has to be
Hmm.
going on anyway, all the
Yeah.
time, right? Up, back, down the front, up, the back, down the front. Leg moves into the center, then it moves away from the center, bringing you, so you constantly have that, which even an amoeba does, right?
Right. Hmm.
So I think there is something that's probably going on at all levels with that rhythmic thing. Life does everything in rhythm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, from reproducing to vomiting to sneezing to laughing to sobbing to, I mean, it all has that sine wave in it.
Yeah.
I
Even
think
cultures that have stages of life too is kind of the ceremonial aspect of life. There's rhythm in life, and I'm thinking that very in our society, non-attachment is often mistaken for anesthesia, right? And one of the things you love about dogs, I love about dogs, is that they don't live in anesthesia. They feel everything fully, and the whole being feels everything fully, so that when they die, there's nothing left undone,
Right.
right?
Right.
each moment is for its own sake, and there's
No
nothing
attachment.
undone. Yeah, no attachment. And so this sense of, Montaigne's peasant, of having done everything right, having done everything what they needed to do. This is not detachment from day one. This is like involvement from day one, but also not expecting rewards. Right? You do each thing for its own sake. And
Mhm.
if you do each thing as an end in itself, then there's nothing left undone. At any moment, you can be cut off.
Right. Right.
So I was going to a similar place, Krishnan, about
Mhm.
tying this walking and rhythm question back to the earlier topic about what does preparation for death mean, and both why is death something to be prepared for, and what does preparation entail? And you mentioning these rhythms, these macro rhythms of life, rites of passage, bar mitzvah, marriage, midlife crisis,
Mhm.
you name it, um, and or the chapters that we've talked about on several episodes from Seasons of a Man's Life. Um,
And waking and sleeping.
Yeah.
so
Hmm.
so I think Leonard Cohen said shortly before he died, I think it was him. We all assume birth is a miracle. We always say, "What a miracle that this life came into the universe." But why don't we think of death that way too? It's the other bookend miracle of this experience. But we don't see that as clearly. And even what some of the things you just said about if we live each life, each moment for what it is without expecting reward, then we can be cut off any time without attachment. That implies to me that death is not necessarily something to be prepared for. So can we come back to that? Why, like, is death a miracle also like birth is? Um, I like what Brian said earlier that touched on this about um, in hindsight, we can see every human life was a narrative, and it has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and therefore some trajectory, right? So that I think gets us a little closer to. I think we're kind of asking, does death matter, or does death matter beyond the contextualization of the anxiety that that we referred to earlier, or maybe I'm losing the thread a little bit, but hopefully I've brought us back to preparation for death and both ends of that death and preparation question.
Hmm. Hmm. I think it is preparation for death. It's either going to be preparation for death or preparation for avoiding death, right? It's because I'm thinking of the wax on, wax off and Karate Kid.
Is that
So
more than a statement of faith though? Like how do you think about that?
preparation for. It's in a way it is a statement of faith. And I mean, in this way is that you don't know whatever you're doing at a given point, you don't know what it's preparing you for, right? You might have certain ideas, but you really can't imagine what this is making you into. Um, I think of like wax on, wax off in Karate Kid. The kid doesn't know why he's doing that. He thinks, it's boring. He wants to get to the fighting part. But but from the point of view of the serious practitioner, is that wherever you are in it, if you're serious, you're practicing, right? Just like the advanced pianist is, the great classical pianist is not bored practicing scales every morning. The karateka is not bored practicing the one basic punch every morning. There's that in those little things, it's bottomless. The karateka is not bored cleaning the dojo, and getting the floor shining. So that is, in a way, that is not preparation for practice if practice is conceived of as an ends with means. But in serious practice, uh, the means are the ends. So if you cut off there cleaning the dojo, somebody comes in and kills you. You've been doing what you're supposed to do, right? So it's that immersion. I think maybe this is what was meant by virtue. This immersion in excellence at any given point, doing your best. That doing your best with your fullest capacity. That whether you like it or not, I think that's a preparation for death, because then you can die contented, knowing that you've done what you're supposed to do, what you were put here to do. But it's not a preparation for death in the sense of a means to an end, right? And so that's not what I mean. Is that it's a mean to an end, in a way that seeing how every action you do is an end, right? I think that's the meaning of kind of an immersion in the chi of an activity like this. Your understanding with every bone in your body how you're connected with it, and how this thing is an end. Now then the question is, what if you're being asked to do something unethical, right? So in a way that the way I've just described it is an ethicless view of action. And whatever you do it with your full being as an end in itself. And you can see how that's ethically or politically dangerous. But I think that, not having thought through the rest of it, but I think that is essential to a full life.
Yeah, I think Heidegger used the term resoluteness. Now, I don't know whether that was a good translation or not. And the dangerous argument goes along with Heidegger also, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But, and I recall a time when I think I heard Terence McKenna getting asked basically the same question. And the one about why do we need to prepare for death? And his answer was, because based on the Tibetan Book of the Dead and, some of the other yogic traditions, he said, it seems like there's a possibility we can mess it up. And, I think that's when we do get into the attachments, and we maybe, ayahuasca, of course, is called the vine of the dead. And I think the idea is that, one kind of visits what the other side, sort of the disorientation of consciousness, and how to sort of sort some of those things out before one actually has to do it. But even the Tibetan Book of the Dead, I had a chance to talk for about an hour with Ram Dass on one occasion, just he and I. And I asked him, I said, why did you're trying to get a map for this other side. Why did you go to the Tibetan Book of the Dead? And why didn't you go to the ayahuasqueros? And he said, we tried to find the ayahuasqueros and they just wouldn't come out of the woodwork for us. They just, but he said that really the Tibetan Book of the Dead was all we've got, all we really could find to try to map things that are beyond our normal consciousness. And that's where I think we've probably made a lot of progress in the past, But one of the things, curiously, that I happened on today was Michelangelo's last words.
What were they?
Any guesses? I feel like someone should win a car or something if they know this.
What?
Ancora imparo. I am still learning.
Yeah.
Pretty good.
That's a good way to die. Yeah.
And I think it does have that, it implies an openness as opposed to a closedness. It implies a readiness for wonder as opposed to a necessary terror.
Yeah.
And for somebody, one of the fun things about Michelangelo is they say that he was hideous. And yet here was a guy, I thought, oh my God, look at what he created at the Pietà at 21 or something like that, right? I'm like, oh, that's amazing. I just saw this morning a sculpture he did at 16.
Right.
I'm like, come on here. This is not a normal thing.
No,
This is,
no.
and I started thinking about Hephaestus, and that deformation somehow being connected to creation and the perception of beauty and ugliness. And somehow that's also tied up with understanding beauty through understanding ugliness, understanding life through understanding death.
Right. I mean,
Um,
you've been thinking a lot about ugliness. I see Socrates was also famously ugly. So in terms of like beauty and ugliness, life and death, right? He would have agreed with Michelangelo. He says, why should I be afraid? I have no idea what's going to happen.
yeah, in fact, it
You know,
might be one of the more informative experiences.
yeah,
But I
Ultimately.
think that saying, "Why should I be afraid? I have no idea what's gonna happen." That's kinda what I keep coming back to, and, if I'm getting annoying, feel free to tell me. But that's kind of another way of saying death is neither to be prepared for nor to be unprepared for. It's just an unknown, and I liked what you said a few minutes ago, Krishnan, about since we could go any minute or not, the quality of what we do matters. It either matters for our next moment in experiencing greater quality in what we do, or for being satisfied that we did our best,
right.
when we had the chance, right? But it's kind of like hedging. Uh, Um,
Mhm.
but it doesn't say that death is in and of itself a thing to be prepared for. It's just part of the context. And if you operate as though death were not a specter, you could come to the same conclusions.
Yeah, I'd agree with you, and I think I need to rephrase or be more specific about how I'm understanding the word death here. By death, I don't mean a thing, So by preparing for death, what all I mean is preparing to say goodbye to everything. That's everything. That's all I mean, and it's very striking that because if I say death as a concept, I really have no idea what I'm talking about. It's a totally empty concept. But in the Satipatthana Sutta in the Pali discourses, when the Buddha talks about meditation on dying figures, meditation on corpses, look at the corpse carefully, look at the corpse in every period of decomposition. He never uses the word death. He doesn't say that this is a contemplation of death. That what we call death is just a moment in a process that is unknown to us right now. So it's a continuum. It's a larger context. We don't know where all the stuff goes. All we know is from this point of view, the being that we're familiar with is not there anymore. That's what we know from this point of view. It's what we see. We don't know what that thing is. So in a way, it's very misleading to talk about a thing called death. That if that suggests that we're talking about something, we're not. We're talking about saying goodbye to everything.
We're
That's
talking
a
about
really
everything
useful
else, literally.
Yeah. Right.
that's a
Yeah.
useful
Mm.
clarification, Krishnan. So if we think of death as the moment where we say goodbye to everything, and preparation for death is figuring out, let's say, how to be okay with that or more than okay with that. Um, let's go back to the topic you brought up earlier about attachment and non-attachment, because it seems like, and anesthesia, because
Mhm.
it seems like one could conclude that to prepare for saying goodbye to everything means perhaps starting to say goodbye now. But then we miss out on the juice that we get from being connected to things now, and in particular connected to people, right?
Right.
So where do you go with that?
Yeah. So you're talking about premature non-attachment. So I say that
I think
that
I saw an ad for that last time I watched the YouTube video.
yeah,
Right.
because premature non-attachment is not non-attachment, right? It's attachment to a certain security of mind.
Good point.
Yeah. Um. So, or attachment
Spiritual
to
bypass.
A spiritual bypass, right, right, right. It's an attachment to a quality of feeling, perhaps. That I don't want to feel bad, so I'm going to start. So aversion is just the reverse of desire, right? It's the same. It's essentially the same thing. That not wanting to feel bad is just as much attachment as wanting to feel good.
But life will disattach you.
Yeah.
And I won't say that it takes the juice away, but maybe it shifts you over to a distillate
What are you
instead
thinking?
of, well, because you don't maybe you certainly can't seize life the way you did when you were 22.
Mm-hmm.
And so your understanding and appreciation, what it takes to make you fulfilled has to go through some transmutations that I would say is a distillate based on your hermeneutical capabilities.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I had to get that in there somehow, the H word. Um,
Yeah.
but because again, we're talking about our understanding of life, the universe, and everything, and what
Mm-hmm.
death is, without having to be anything positive, is a contextualizing environment ontologically. And again, without getting too Heideggerian, this idea that a being towards death somehow, that it's conditional, it's an ontological condition somehow. And so it frames everything. And I'm stuck on this idea that all meaning is based in a context. And so it is the ultimate ontological context without which there can be no ontological meaning of any kind.
Yeah, yeah, and it itself has a context when you're talking about specific deaths, right?
That
Because
it
I think about
creates
what,
the arena for logos to,
yeah,
to manifest. Yeah.
yeah, because I'm thinking about something like Wordsworth's emotion recollected in tranquility, or the deep wisdom in an Ozu film, or something where there's no simple emotion, right? That all the emotions are bittersweet and complex, and this is something that you get with aging. Is that you don't you never get giddy in an emotion, right? So a baby is born, you don't say, "Oh, cool, yes." You kind of like an older person can't help but see all the troubles ahead of it, or for the parents, or couple get married, right? You can't get giddy about it, so
If
there's a
they
happy.
only knew.
Yeah, right. But you can understand what they're all feeling, but it qualified by a much bigger context and much more complex sense of possible consequences, right? And so this thing is, you can't tell where it's heading. You're not going to get lost in any simple emotion, but perhaps the thing is, the capacity to do that is, I think, greater with the years and with reflection on life. Of course, in a culture that is completely obsessed with youth, it's obsessed with maintaining the giddy emotion at all times, right? And so the young mind is, again, there's a time for that. That was part that in the rhythm there was a time for the young mind, and then as we grow older, we're kind of like absorbing in our capacity to experience any given moment as much of the previous moments as we can. So the context, the experience of a given moment has a wider and more complex context for experiencing. I see it as experiencing more in HD, right? You see more in a given moment, and
Yeah.
as you get older, and that should be the case, right? And this is why the thought of dying, or of saying goodbye, is going to be bittersweet, and not so overwhelmed by, say, the giddiness of fear or the giddiness of despair, or at least it shouldn't be. At that age, if we've been doing this right, if we've been doing this reflective maturing right.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Well, and it's connected up, which we haven't really spoken about directly, is with the idea of the self, which we have talked about in other episodes. But we can't talk about death without talking about what is the nature of the self and the experiencing self. And I'm in James now on the chapter on consciousness of self, so it's not like I'm just pulling this out of thin
Right.
air. But but this idea that he presents is that each new moment brings, because we exist in duration, it brings with us our accumulation from all the past moments.
Mm-hmm.
So that really, as we age, we have more to distill, and we bring that with us, and that's the foundation of the curve that always goes up, that never,
Yeah.
right, that has to do with that progress in awareness. But it seems to me that as we get a more nuanced idea of what the self is, we necessarily come away with what a more nuanced grasp of what the disillusion of self must
Mm.
entail.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so that there's something there, and that, of course, involved with attachment, but also, with what were your parents' faces, or what was your face before your parents
Yeah.
were born?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, from
Yeah.
that respect. Um,
Yeah. And there's a moment to get out of the way, right? There's a moment to get out. I'm just thinking, the older generation, when we were young, they were the ones who were framing everything for us. Even in our practices, they framed everything for us, and they kept us from going beyond those frames. But there's a time when we mature, and we say, well, it's time for them to step back, and then we're going to take the reins, whether we like it or not. We need to start doing the framing ourselves. We need to move into the space. But similarly, we have to get out of the way, so and that's a good thing. So,
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
I
Well,
cringe
that
because I've
shoe.
seen some of the framing of future generations. They're not. There's some good stuff in there for sure, but there's some scary stuff too.
Yeah, but our generation was terrifying.
I suppose.
Well, we talked about on a couple episodes ago the Japanese concept of shu-ha-ri,
Mm,
where shu is the learn phase, and then ha is break away.
mm,
And where you do need that, it's also, Nietzsche's prolegomena and Zarathustra.
right.
Um, but then the final re is transcension. So
Mm,
it's like, yeah, breaking away is kind of all about you. But then the re phase, the transcension phase, now it's not about you.
yeah.
But you kind of had to go through it being about you, because when you started in the shoe phase, when you're learning, it's certainly not about you. And
Hmm.
then break away is that owning it. And then the transcension is the old man stage, where it's yeah. And I just always imagine Ueshiba staring off into the those photos of him. And it's like, this dude, he is a space cadet to the ultimate degree. And but coming out of the same Shinto idea, I think, of this transcension, and that through technique we transcend technique, right? Through this focused awareness, we transcend this attached, uh, hyper-centered individuality, and that's
Yeah.
that re. Yeah,
Yeah, and part of that transcension, as you grow older, and as you've lived to the utmost what you're supposed to have done, then as you get older, this awareness comes over you. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to be good at anything. You've done all that. There's no shame or pride attached now, and so the release into that gives you a kind of contemplative freedom, but also the freedom to be a fool, right? I don't that I can if I learn the piano, I can do my own thing. I'm never going to be good at the piano. I'm not going to be able to learn the traditional way. I'm just going to mess around with it and see what comes up. And it might be ugly and ridiculous, but it actually doesn't matter now, right? I can play.
yeah, very, very
Yeah.
much so. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, before we let you go, Krishnan, I want to come back to something you said at the very beginning. When you said the name of the book that your essay will appear in is Thoreau and Philosophy, and the implication there is that the end raises some questions.
Yeah.
And what I'm making some assumptions about Thoreau and the relationship between mysticism, maybe, and philosophy, but that could be a completely wrong assumption. What does the end mean to you? And it's funny because in the last episode we did together, you said, "What does the and mean in War and Peace?"
Right. Yeah.
And so I think here we are again.
Yeah.
What does the and mean in Thoreau and philosophy?
Can I read you a passage from Thoreau?
Yeah, please.
This is from this is one of the Zhuangzi-like passages in it. So this is in Katahdin, which is the first part of the main woods. And in Katahdin, he takes off with a couple of friends to hike up Mount Katahdin, which at that time was like totally wild and totally wild and perilous. And this is whereas Walden is set in the peripheries of human civilization. In this book, he goes out into the wilds. And so this passage, he gets to the top of Mount Katahdin and he realizes how unfriendly nature is to man, how indifferent, right? So I'm going to read that passage. It'd be about 2 minutes long. So nature was here something savage and awful, though beautiful. I looked with awe at the ground I trod on, to see what the powers had made there, the form and fashion and material of their work. This was that earth of which we have heard, made out of chaos and old night. Here was no man's garden, but the unhandled globe. It was not lawn, nor pasture, nor mead, nor woodland, nor lea, nor arable, nor wasteland. It was the fresh and natural surface of the planet Earth, as it was made forever and ever, to be the dwelling of man, we say. So nature made it, and man may use it if he can. Man was not to be associated with it. It was matter, vast, terrific, not his mother Earth that we have heard of, not for him to tread on or be buried in. No, it were being too familiar even to let his bones lie there. The home, this, of necessity and fate. There was clearly felt the presence of a force not bound to be kind to man. It was a place for heathenism and superstitious rites, to be inhabited by men nearer of kin to the rocks and to wild animals than we. We walked over it with a certain awe, stopping from time to time to pick the blueberries which grew there and had a smart and spicy taste. Perchance where our wild pines stand and leaves lie on the forest floor, in Concord, there were once reapers and husbandmen planted grain. But here, not even the surface had been scarred by man, but it was a specimen of what God saw fit to make this world. What is it to be admitted to a museum, to see a myriad of particular things compared with being shown some star's surface, some hard matter in its home? I stand in awe of my body. This matter to which I am bound has become so strange to me. I fear not spirits, ghosts of which I am one. That my body might, but I fear bodies. I tremble to meet them. What is this Titan that has possession of me? Talk of mysteries. Think of our life in nature, daily to be shown matter, to come in contact with it. Rocks, trees, wind on our cheeks. The solid earth, the actual world, the common sense. Contact. Who are we? Where are we?
Yeah, that's that drive that, as he put it in Walden, to work his feet down to find rocks in place and say, this is, and no mistake.
Yeah, but he ends on the question. Let's say who, where, what, how. So it's an indeterminate question. But I think that is the. I mean, who are we? Where are we? I mean, this is through walking, right? So the act of walking is at the top here, and this emerges naturally from this walking, the kind of the prototypical philosophical orientation to life. So to that extent, Thoreau, I think, was a philosopher in that he had the pre-philosophical attunement. The way he's not a philosopher is that he didn't feel the need to answer that or make a system out of that.
Right. He didn't argue it per se.
Yeah.
Right.
What did he do with it?
I think his answer to it is in a narrative of encounter with nature, of a walk. And that's not something you're going to put in a philosophical proposition that you can quote. So somehow is the meditative experience with that, and maybe it's in that bittersweet kind of emotionally complex view from age is that you're taking in a whole, and it's not going to be expressed simply to anyone.
And he pointed at it, which is what a naturalist does.
Yes.
Right. He looks at it and he observes it and he says, "Look at this."
Yeah.
And then it speaks for itself.
Yeah. The question comes alive.
That's
Yeah.
how
Yeah.
I think you, Brian, but maybe both of you characterized how Eastern philosophy generically differed in a sense from Western philosophy generically, in that there was in the last episode we were talking about dispositional and propositional knowledge, and how an Eastern teacher of philosophy might take you, Brian, and say, look at this plant, look at, right? And uh, we also talked last time about Thoreau in a way being an Eastern philosopher. And so maybe that "and" is part of what we're referring to, and maybe even coloring in the distinction a little more in generically what we mean between Eastern and Western, and the difference.
Yeah, I would qualify that a little bit by saying that the Eastern would have to be like Chinese and Japanese type philosophy. Eastern would not include India, that was much more systematic in its thinking, much more logical
Right.
and systematic. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Anyway.
in a way, he was almost a prelude to the phenomenologists,
Yeah.
because he really wants to drill in on experience, and which is why context becomes so important. You can think Kant in any setting, and it may not help, but
Yeah.
you can. But somehow, to get Thoreau's point, you have to have some commonality of a type of experience.
Right.
And so he really is telling you, go try to figure out what I'm talking about, which is what Hanshan says. Try to make it to Cold Mountain,
Hmm.
right? And if you can get here, it'll be worth your time. But I'm not going to argue with you about it, right?
Right. Right.
That would this might be the essence of transcendentalism, is to transcend that type of argumentation for a direct type of experience of truth,
Yeah.
which often gets called intuition because it's direct and there's no reason chain to come to a conclusion. It just is.
Right. But
And
and it's not intuition if people think that this is kind of a mind thing, but what we've been describing is a full body thing.
right,
Right.
right.
Feet ground. Yeah.
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 And then Thoreau was a common dinner guest at the house of William James's parents,
Yes.
who later was to influence Edmund Husserl, who was to create this whole phenomenological impulse,
Mm.
right, that makes it all the way to Heidegger and everything. And yeah,
Yeah.
so some interesting. I don't know how anybody could say Thoreau wasn't a philosopher, honestly.
Hmm.
Uh, but I think that maybe if they have the tendency to want to say that, I would suggest that maybe their philosophical bailiwick is a little too tight and too constraining. That that maybe there's something beyond analytics,
Hmm.
and that's what my takeaway from Eastern approaches was, that it isn't all just payload. It's in the method.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Yeah. I'd agree with that. I'm afraid I have to go and pick up kids now.
I think we're at a really nice stopping point.
Yeah.
Krishnan, seeing you today made me really happy. I'm so
Uh,
glad that you came
Thank you.
back,
I'm
and
happy to be here. Happy to talk with you guys. I learned
love,
stuff.
We always
Mm.
enjoy it.
yeah, love the conversation, and I look forward to reading your essay. Where can I find it?
Um, I'll send you an email when it's out. I think it should be out in June or July. It's in the book. Um, Thoreau and Philosophy. Easy to find.
Great. And I wanted to mention, for those folks that are listeners that are interested in Thoreau, if you go to the playlist on our channel, I've actually read Walden in 9 parts. Very
Great.
few commentaries. It's a direct reading of the 1865, I believe it is, text, with very, very few commentaries. I
Oh,
just pretty
wonderful.
much I'll explain a thing or two here, but it's so if you want to read it in the car or something like that, 9 episodes, they're about an hour each, so something like that.
Great. Thank you both. And
Thank
see
you,
you next
Krishnan.
time.
Good to see you, sir, as always.
Okay, bye-bye.